Ladies and gentlemen, Joanne Murphy.
Hello, and welcome to the Crandall Theatre's first live virtual program, Harvesting Change, Our Food Supply in Pandemic Times. I'm Joanne Dunn Murphy, Chair of the Crandall's Community Outreach Committee. On behalf of the Crandall, thank you for your loyal support both in the past and now while we are closed. I'm delighted to say that all 100 places for this event have been filled. Our next live virtual event will be the Farm Film Fest on September 13th, and I hope you will join us again. Today's program has been generously sponsored by Hawthorne Valley Association. We are very grateful to Elaine Kosrova for volunteering to be the producer and to Grace Fay for technical support. We are honored to have the participation of leading lights in sustainable food and farming. Kathleen Finley will moderate a discussion between Ruth Reichl, Kate Arding, and Henry Corsun. After about 45 minutes, there will be time for about 15 minutes of questions. If you'd like to send in a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. To paraphrase the Crandall's pandemic motto, be safe, be kind. And now to Kathleen.
My name is Kathleen Finley. I'm the president of the Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming. It's my pleasure to moderate this awesome panel of folks with lots of expertise today and talking about how the pandemic has affected our food system. So for those of you who don't know Glenwood, we are a nonprofit organization in the Hudson Valley, and we work to promote a regional food system because we think it's healthier for our communities and our environment and our economies. And we do that in a number of ways. We have a farm that we use to train new entry farmers. We work with food and farming professionals in a variety of educational settings. And perhaps most importantly, that we'll probably talk about a bit today, is we build coalitions of professionals in food and farming. So we have a coalition of farmers who use CSA as their primary form of distribution. And we have a coalition of cider makers, of alcoholic cider makers that are helping to keep apple orchards in the ground in the Hudson Valley. And we have a coalition of healthcare representatives that are helping to move the needle on regional food. And we have a suite of food access initiatives that are gaining momentum as we speak, helping to both support farms and get food to the folks who need it in our communities. So I just wanted to give you a little bit about Glenwood before we kick off. But without any further ado, I'm going to start asking our panelists to weigh in with from their perspective, how the pandemic has really affected them and their work in particular. And by answering those questions, we'll learn a little bit more about the work that each of these folks are doing. So I'm going to start with you, Henry. And, Henry's been on a lot of the calls that Glenwood organized in the early days of the pandemic and was incredibly helpful in talking to farmers about, especially farmers who are serving restaurants, about what to do with their products and thinking about how to carry on their businesses safely. So Henry, tell us a little bit more about your businesses. You have a couple, and just like what's happening to you and the farms that you work with.
Sure. So I started farming in 2012, and my partner Sarah and I have two farm businesses, Dogwood Farm and Rock City Mushrooms. We raise grass-fed beef, pastured poultry, and indoor cultivated mushrooms. And we're located in Old Chatham in Columbia County. And we also, around the same time that we started our farm businesses, also in collaboration with other local farms, started a project called Good Food Farmers Network. And the idea behind Good Food Farmers was to try to create a model for farmer-owned distribution that was something that had been talked about for many years in the local farming community, and in 2014 we formed the entity and made a foray into it. So it started off very much like a multi-farm CSA, and over the first few years, it evolved almost exclusively into home delivery, serving a few specific neighborhoods primarily in Westchester. And we work with about 20 different farms, and it was very slow growth for a long time, and I really equate it to being similar to organic farming in that it was slow and steady. And I do think out of that, though, came a model that was really resilient and was able to respond to the pandemic and quickly scale. And the idea always behind it has been that it's farmer owned and that it's replicable and it's scalable. And so we're seeing that happen now. And we had about 100 orders going out a week in mid-March, and now we have about 500 active members and 300 to 400 orders that go out a week. And we have always, we emphasize working with small scale farms, anchored by larger farms as needed. And we have been able to absorb a lot of product from farms that lost restaurant accounts, and so that we're not necessarily as well positioned as other farms to with direct distribution channels. So
right.
And it could continue to be scaled. So I think it's an exciting model to move a lot of food for local farms. Great.
Kate, you deal in the world of cheese, and really artisan and farm-based cheese, I would say, is your expertise. What's been happening for cheesemakers, both here locally and nationally, and even internationally?
Well, I wear a couple of different hats. So one is the one that you describe, which I'm happy to talk about, and the other is that I'm the co-owner of Talbott and Arding, which is a retail store in Hudson, and we sell prepared foods and a selection of cheeses, of course, but there are also many other strands to the business, such as catering, wholesale, e-commerce, and so on. So I'm sort of coming at this from a couple of different angles. But to answer your question, that first question, I'll try and be concise. But it's the impact on the cheese making community has been pretty dire. I mean, it really has. And just to be clear, my expertise is the smaller scale producers, as you say, the artisan and the farmhouse, but also the larger scale, commodity producers have been vastly impacted as well. So I think to speak to the smaller scale, the impact has varied enormously by region. That's what I'm hearing. I think sort of in line with what Henry was saying, actually, a lot of the advantages of being smaller are that you can pivot, this new word that's entered our lexicon, and be much more nimble in terms of responding to the pandemic and to the associated challenges. And I think, for example, the biggest challenge really for a lot of the farmers who are also producing cheese, dairy farmers who are producing cheese, are that you can't simply just turn off the milk supply. You've got all this milk coming down the sort of pipe, literally, and so a number of them, for example, have either transitioned into making cheeses that can age for a longer time, in the hope that, you know, they're not wasting the milk, but by the time hopefully we come through this, the cheeses will be aged and they will actually be worth more than they were for a fresher style. Others have adopted the opposite stance and taken, they're making a lot more fresher milk, fresher style cheeses with a view to, for example, donating them to food pantries so that they're not actually pouring milk down the drain. But that has happened a lot, less so now, but in the first, you know, March and April, it was absolutely appalling. I mean, one dairy farmer I spoke to in Wisconsin was, you know, dumping 42,000 gallons of milk a day, and he's not even particularly massive. You know, so yeah, it was huge.
Yeah, great, and not great, but thanks for sharing that. Ruth, you've been on a journey since the pandemic started of trying to talk to, I feel like, as many people as you can get on your Zoom screen about what's going on. Give us, you know, I'm often asked, is this good for the farmers or bad for the farmers? Because people see the direct sales markets, like Henry described, that's a 4-fold increase in his business. And then you hear these headlines about food waste, and then you read headlines about small scale farming it's the end is nigh. What do you help walk us through those arguments?
Okay, I started this project because I felt like I wanted to keep a record of how this pandemic is affecting the food supply, because it seemed to me that we are in a moment where we can either fix our horribly broken food system, and what the pandemic is pointing out is exactly how broken it really has been. You know, the restaurant model really isn't sustainable as a business for the most part. Farmers, most farmers, small farmers in America, have other jobs to support their farming. You know, fishermen without restaurants, 85% of the fish in this country are sold in restaurants. So the fishermen are desperate, and on and on. I mean, the way milk is sold in this country is insane. Yeah. Nobody can explain how milk is priced. And all of this, it comes down essentially to the fact that the government decided at the end of World War II that we were going to fight communism by having the cheapest food in the world. And we do. We have by far the cheapest food of any nation in the world. We spend 7% of our income on food. That's ridiculous. And we all know what the results of that have been in terms of the devastation of the earth and people's health and so forth. And it struck me that maybe this would be a moment when Americans would start cooking again, and they would start, you know, liking to cook and liking to sit down with their families, and they would have to go to farmers and they would connect with their food. Or the opposite could happen. And we could, you know, 40 years of work on sustainability could go out the window, and we could end up with an even more industrialized food landscape, and probably most of the people in America won't care. And so I wanted to be able to track the changes as they're happening. And it's been fascinating because it literally changes every day. And who is affected changes every day. I mean, 4 months ago, I would have said to you that I thought farmers were in trouble. In fact, it seems to me the exact opposite is happening. And what, you know, farmers, even the ones who supply restaurants, I mean, with a few exceptions, I mean, the restaurants, the farmers that only supplied restaurants are having a hard time. But for the most part, farmers can't grow enough food to feed the people who want them, and CSAs are sold out. And that's really hopeful. I mean, people are learning how important their farmers are. I thought restaurants were going to do better than, I mean, I thought that they were going to have trouble. But I am very pessimistic about what's happening for restaurants, and the lack of leadership in this country has been so dire that, you know, every time a restaurant closes and opens, it costs them a fortune. I mean, paperwork, the hiring people and firing people. And, you people who were very resilient 4 months ago are exhausted and, sort of looking around and going, this isn't fun anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to lose a lot of independent restaurants, which is really an unhappy situation. But I also think we're starting to understand how bad, I mean, for instance, meat. And one of the people I talk to regularly is a conventional rancher in Kansas. And he is starting to say the things that all the people that we know who raise sustainable meat are saying, which is, we need a regional system. Yeah. This is insane. The way, 4 major meat packers, half of them foreign owned, control the meat market in America. Mm. And of course, what we're also seeing is that the Trump government is taking this moment to deregulate everything they can. And so the situation in meatpacking plants is getting more and more dire. I mean, they're speeding up the chicken lines. New Yorker had a really sad piece about that this week. And so I think the hopeful thing that I see is that one of the things I love about food is that it is something that consumers can control. If every consumer in America said they didn't want to eat tortured animals anymore, CAFOs would go out of business. It would instantly go out of business. And I am hopeful that this is a moment when American consumers will look around and say, we need to do better. Mm-hmm. And we need to pay what food costs.
Right. Let's talk about both of those things. One is, I'd love to hear from Henry and Kate. I think there is increased awareness of the food system writ large because of the vulnerabilities that have caused the disruptions that have affected people. I'm curious what you think, how much of it will stick as we move forward in time. How much of that awareness and interest and for many folks, introduction into a regional food system will stick. And then I think I'll ask some questions about the last point you raised, Ruth, which is around the cost of food and how we can use this moment to think about food access. But Henry, let me ask you, what do you think when you look down and kind of in the crystal ball and from your perspective?
It's pretty cloudy these days.
Yeah, it's very cloudy. But do you think the trends you're seeing from consumers?
Yeah.
You think they're is it a game changer?
I mean, I think it's really hard to say, and I think we're in a somewhat interesting position to be gauging that, because unlike this traditional CSA model where members are committing for the season, our members pay by the week and they can cancel anytime. So I think we're going to see more quickly than the CSAs what the staying power is of the shift that's happened thus far. And I mean, at this point, I guess I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. I think we at Good Food Farmers and on our farm have always fallen short on the communications and storytelling side of what we do. I think we could do a lot more, and I think if we did more, I think it would have an impact, especially now that people are at home. They are looking for activities to do with their kids. I think there's a lot we could take advantage of if we had the resources and the time and the people power to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there that would be great to take advantage of right now. For us also, our model is different in that we go year round, and we typically are slowest at the end of July and August because people historically have gone out of town at those times. And for us, things tend to bump back up in the fall. So I'm curious, we're seeing a little bit of that dip not as much as we have in the past. So I think it remains to be seen. I am optimistic, but I think there's more we could do to better ensure that the momentum and the awareness continues as we move forward into the fall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that more that we can do, I'm hearing, is communication, some more raising, building on the awareness raising that's already out there.
Yeah, I think, what we have, even though Good Food Farmers is aggregating food and delivering it on behalf of a group of farms, we still have always, a goal of ours has been to emphasize the direct relationship that our members have with us as farmers. And I think that's the most critical piece. People need to feel that we are their farmers and we are in a reciprocal relationship. And that's what, for example, for us, as we're looking to the winter, we don't have the capacity to grow enough winter greens to sustain the increased level of membership. So we will be putting out a call to the members to ask them to put a deposit down, basically to invest up front, to expand our winter growing capacity for this season. And I think that will be very telling of how committed people are to having local food beyond, into the future. Mm-hmm. So those, the fall, I think it remains to be seen, but we'll get some indications early on, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Kate, how about you? What do you feel like, either from a retail operation that serves a lot of local and regional farm-based food, to a catering operation, or to with a cheesemonger hat on? What do you?
Well, we're in a really interesting position right now, because in addition to navigating the roller coaster of the last few months, which we've managed to do, which I'm very proud of everybody who works with us, for reacting so well and so positively. But even prior to the pandemic, we had and we have these plans to greatly expand the business to new premises. And in January, we signed a lease on an 8,000 square foot space in Hudson. So in addition to this kind of micro sort of day-to-day, like, oh my goodness, are we going to be okay? We're also having to think on the macro. It's like, okay, now we have to raise an enormous amount of money for a market that we don't know for sure is going to be there. So it's been quite interesting. But what has become clear in the last few weeks is that actually, as a business, because we're takeout, we're absolutely perfectly primed to take advantage of this. And in fact, ironically, when the pandemic first hit, and it was that really crazy few weeks and nobody knew what was going on and it was all terrifying, not that it isn't now, but the people were stockpiling. We had customers calling up and ordering 30 shepherd's pies. It was bonkers. We just couldn't. So it was kind of exciting in a different way. Now that's calmed down, and sales are sort of steady. But the delay, for the build out for the new space, has actually been to our advantage, because I'm very much of the opinion that now so many more people, especially older people, have mastered the mysteries of online ordering. They are now more convinced than ever that they don't necessarily want to come into a physical retail space anymore. And we've been hearing that loud and clear. So to that end, for example, we've actually changed the layout of the new space, and we've increased the size of the kitchen and actually slightly shrunk the retail area, but we've also introduced a dedicated curbside pickup so that people don't have to come in. So things like, and also introduced higher levels of air handling, for example. Right. Touchless surfaces. So it's to what's been said previously. It's a mixed bag. It's very interesting what's going on. But I think in terms of the future, so we personally, I feel very positive about the future. I think it's scary, but I think as a business and as a business owner, I think we're going to be okay. Better than okay, I hope. But to the point about food in general, I've always thought, if you've been exposed to, for example, a really great steak, you've tasted a really great steak, and somehow subconsciously in your mind, you're always trying to get back to that food experience, so it may be that the bigger luxuries, like the holiday in the South America or wherever, goes out of the window. But I think particularly when people are so sort of nervous and uncertain about the future, good food is a huge source of comfort. And also, I would say the importance of local community. And I think as much as we've been experiencing sort of solid sales of food, I think a lot of that, especially in the early days, a lot of the customers, especially our regulars, were getting an enormous amount out of that personal contact with us and vice versa. It was very reassuring. So having those relationships counts for a tremendous amount.
Right. And let's talk a little bit about those in our communities who struggle to put food on the table. So, especially in this time of such energy around Black Lives Matter and civil rights and equity, and so many of the young and new entry farmers that I work with are really called to farm because of the social justice work that can be done through food and food sovereignty. Ruth, in your conversations, how is, and just recognizing that we're all white on this panel, which is a little bit of a reflection on the work we all have to do. But in talking to folks, what's come up for you in terms of food sovereignty, and in this moment, how both the pandemic and what's happening in our culture and our society work together to something positive?
Well, let me tell you one of the most interesting conversations I had. Last week, I spoke with a professor at UC Berkeley, Dr. Eskenazi, and who has been working with farm workers in Central California for the last 25 years. And one of the things that's happened in this pandemic is that for the first time, the people who represent the farm workers and the farmers, the packers, these big industrial farmers are working together because they understand that their workers are truly essential to them, and that if they allow them to become COVID hotspots, they're in terrible trouble. And so really for the first time, they're all sitting down together on a weekly basis and discussing, what they have to do to keep people safe, how they get them better housing. They're talking about better wages. And, that's really where it begins. If once we agree that we're going to start paying the people who pick the food, who pack the food decently, then they can afford to buy decent food. Everybody always says, well, you can't raise the price of food because there's so many people who can't afford it. Of course, the answer to that is, well, make sure that they can afford it. Mm-hmm. And how do you make sure that they afford it? You pay them fairly. And so it's starting to work the other way around, where suddenly, if we accept that these people are really essential, then we pay them right. And there are, there's this whole new group of people who are going out to work on farms because they have nothing to do right now and the farmers need help. And I think that that's an experience that stays with you forever. And there are lots of, chefs and restaurant workers who are in this moment deciding to go out and work in farms. I think that people are rethinking the restaurant model. You know, how do we make restaurants that actually pay people fairly? I mean, the whole tipping issue keeps coming up again. And, you know, I mean, I feel like I personally am learning so much in this moment. I mean, I've been writing about food for 50 years and I thought I really knew a lot. And, you know, every day in this pandemic, I discover, you know, for instance, that there are, in 1920, there were 1 million Black farmers in America, and now there's a handful, 137 in the state of New York, which is shocking. And, you know, there's a new sense that food sovereignty really matters and that we need to think about urban farming and how we feed urban people well. I mean, you know, we in rural America will probably always do okay food-wise, but we really have to think about the cities. And I think people are thinking about those things now in ways they never did before.
Right. And in the rural, or also in the cities in rural areas, a big irony is that some of our, you know, more populous towns in the Hudson Valley are often the ones that are struggling the most to get the food that's being grown in proximity to them. Yeah.
Well, and of course, that's the thing that happened with this cheap food policy is we hollowed out rural America. And, you know, we're starting to think that we really need to think about creating more communities in, you know, across the Midwest where these towns are just dying.
Mm-hmm. Kate, were you involved at all in some of the efforts of the state to, you know, we were talking about the milk, the food waste from dairies, and for those of you who don't know this, the state launched a Nourish New York program that essentially paid farmers to it paid farmers for their product, and then that product went to hunger relief organizations. Much of that work went to dairy farms. Were you did you hear about how successful that was, or if that was a good intervention?
Yeah, you know, I haven't actually. I haven't heard the outcome of that. I mean, I do know that in addition, I did have quite a long conversation with the American Cheese Society, you know, because of this panel, just to try and get some sort of statistics from them, and I do know there has been, you know, a concerted effort, again, very much on a regional basis, of excess milk and also cheese being donated to food pantries and to the hungry, and especially in the sort of harder hit areas. But I think a lot of that has the distribution systems associated with that, you know, getting it into the cities where arguably it's you know, the demand is greatest, is been a challenge. That's what I have heard. Yeah, it's a very different scenario depending on where you are, but there have been a lot of initiatives around that, and also some that have come back to this Victory Cheese Box, which has been more an effort to help support the cheesemakers as well, who, as we've discussed, have been in great trouble. You know, a lot of businesses around the country have been selling cheese online and e-commerce, which e-commerce, I have to say, has helped enormously with offsetting some of these sort of terrible sales figures that we've been seeing in general. So this cheese box, you know, has been helping those producers.
So a Victory Cheese Box, that's like a term that cheesemakers are using to sell a variety of cheese right now?
Yes, it's actually online. It's a sort of national initiative, and it's been adopted by a number of cheese shops and cheese retailers, as well as some online merchants. And they put together, each merchant puts together a selection of cheeses which are sourced from farms or producers that have been particularly badly hit. So it's a way of supporting and driving sales, which and then in turn, helps support people in those rural economies too. Because rural poverty, as we know, is very much a factor. So it's helping keeping those local economies alive.
That's great. Victoria Cheese, I hadn't heard of that. Yeah, Glenwood is actually leading an effort to raise funds to essentially contract farmers for the season and get their products into the hunger relief organization. So it's an example of using this moment to make change that I hope will be much longer lasting. The hunger relief organization food system has been pretty disparate from the regional food system, from the farming perspective. So figuring out mechanisms with unprecedented need because of the pandemic, but making those systems that can last beyond this pandemic, because hunger is a chronic issue, has been really interesting. And the programs that in New York so far have been, haven't commissioned farms for the long term, which is critical for the kind of small farms that we typically work with. And I don't know, Henry, if you would comment on this, but our thinking is a couple of things. One, that whole hunger relief food system depends on donations, which are usually from much bigger farms that can afford it. So the farms that we work with, the margins are slim at best. So donations are sort of off the table. But as I was saying, you and others who are so, socially minded in terms of wanting the farms to feed your own communities, especially those in need, figuring out the mechanisms that we can do that, and making sure that those resources, those funds that we amass from philanthropic sources, or if the state adds more funding, really go to farmers that are BIPOC or LGBTQ or women-led, and also support, historically marginalized communities as well. But if you want to comment on that model, it's interesting because the direct sales are kind of going more towards less contractors, but there might be benefits to doing season-long contracts for things like hunger relief markets. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, a few things. The generosity of members has been really impressive. We still get $150 to $250 a week donated from our member base that's going directly into delivering boxes of fresh produce through partnership with Rocksteady Farm in Millerton and the Westpac Foundation in Westchester. And so I worry or think a lot about also all the people in the middle for whom their money's just a little tight to spend the money on the food we're growing. So models like Rolling Grocer and Hudson and Sliding Scale, and how we can really make sure that everyone who wants to be buying this food can buy it, I think is really important, and is something we're exploring. Another thing is that overall, this moment certainly represents a huge opportunity to transform our food system. And I think one of the, to do that though, and to do it regionally, and to bring food access back to the relief efforts and food access back to the regional level, we need to scale up production. And we need more farmers to do that. And I think the farmer training pipeline needs to be revisited. I think we've always sort of tried to support aspiring farmers in their personal journey to get to having a farm. And I think in this moment, there are viable business models for farms, and there are immediate needs and markets for product that we need to rethink the way we're considering farmer training to get more people quickly onto the land producing good food. So I think that piece is really important. And to Ruth's point, I feel like, what excites me about the food system is that not only can we change the way people, revolutionize the way people eat, we can completely recreate our economy. And there is so much opportunity for good jobs and equity for far more people. And that's what I'm most excited to seize in this present moment, and to just get more people, in a better position financially for the long run out of this moment.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I'll ask this of all three of you. What can the folks that are watching us talk at the moment, we're going to take questions in a little bit, but the question we always get, what can they do, and including what can they advocate for in terms of policy, and what can they support in terms of organizations that you feel are transformative, and then what can they do as consumers? So Ruth, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, I think consumers really have to understand their power. And right now there are so many interesting things going on in Congress that educate yourself on the various bills. There are bills to set up small slaughterhouses across America. I mean, there are dozens of interesting bills in Congress, and I think you need to educate yourself on them and be vocal about that. And beyond that, there's the constant one of vote for your dollars. I mean, really think about the fact that how you spend your dollars really matters. Great.
Kate, do you want to chime in with your advice for our listeners?
I completely agree with Ruth. I think there's education is a huge part of this, and everybody has, of course, their own sort of feelings about who they want to support and what sectors of disadvantaged sections of society or minorities that they want to support. And I think that's a very personal thing. So I would strongly urge people to educate themselves, not only about what's going on in Congress, but also locally, and discuss it. Discuss it with your farmer. Find out who your local farmers are. Go to the farmers market, and talk to people. People love talking, especially about their own businesses, as you will gather. But it's so important, and I think that's something that's very tangible. So again, it's to this sort of micro local level. And to Ruth's point, voting with your dollars, but also educating yourself at a higher level, because the food system needs people, with a strong education and an intelligent approach to get involved, and that's what's also going to, in my opinion, change things in a systemic way, as well as from the ground up. It has to be top down, but also very much a ground up approach.
Henry, same question to you.
Yeah, I think
what can the viewers do?
I think what excites me again about the food system is basically what I would say is just do something, because you can do anything, and it will, if you're excited about kids and food, there's so much to be done there, and so many programs happening there. If you have land, really rethinking your relationship to the land that you own, because we're all stewarding whatever land we have, and we will be passing it on. And what does that look like for you? And that's a big one. Certainly voting with your dollars and how you spend your money. And also, if as you said, Kathleen, there's, this involves distribution, processing, everything. And so whatever excites you, put whatever resources you have, whether it's time or money, towards that, or just awareness. So
that's great. On a similar panel, someone was asked, what can we do? What can I do? And the answer, she said, well, what are you good at? do that.
If I can just add also, there is, in my view, at least from what I've seen, there is no need to recreate the wheel in this moment. There are so many good programs and initiatives already happening that it is, if you identify a need, it's most likely a need that's already been identified, and there are really good people on the ground working on it. So try to find those people and support them rather than trying to start something new. Because honestly, we don't have time to start something new. We need to take what we have and strengthen it and actually change the system. And I think we can really do it right now.
Yeah, I'm here. And what's been amazing from my perspective is the power of the network of the regional food system in our part of the world, so that those connection and communication lines I mentioned earlier just, started popping when the pandemic started, and the ability to find out what's happening, who's doing what's going on. And so the more that I feel like the more we can do to knit those folks together and make sure there's lots of voices in that communication, the better we'll be able to make the changes we all want to see. So a couple questions came in, and one is a very big question about what it would take to localize the food system. Do any of you want to take a crack at an easy answer to that one?
I can start if you'd like.
Great.
I think so. The sheer volume of food that's required to entirely localize our food system is astronomical. So I think to not be overwhelmed by that fact, I would encourage focusing on specific neighborhoods, kind of make our Hudson Valley or our regional food system a smaller entity that we can actually really try to address. And when done successfully, and when we figure out the mechanisms, it can then be replicated. And that's what I would vote for, because we have a lot of the pieces in place. And if we can coordinate and focus our efforts, I think we can create an example of a food system in parallel to our current food system that we can then scale up and transition to. So that's the route I would go.
Yeah. Ruth, Kate, do you want to add to that?
It's such a hopeful.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I mean, because I'm sorry to say that I go to the other place, which is, change the government. I mean, because so much of this.
But that can be an and, right? That can be that and.
But because so much of this really depends on what our national farm policy is, what the farm bill is. I would say, look at the farm bill. It's find out how the farm bill works. It's a really important thing that gets passed every 5 years. And, so much of this just goes back to how the government spends our money. And, if the government decided that we really do need a regional food system for all kinds of reasons, and they could decide it just for this, national security reasons, and decided to put money into it. I mean, it's pretty obvious that you could do it without spending giant fortunes, but that the real problem with this system is how concentrated everything has been in a few major hands, and we need to pull that apart.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we'll make progress in a Biden administration on that front?
I do. I mean, it couldn't be worse.
Right. Well,
Go ahead, Kate. Sorry.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going.
No.
I just wanted to say that, Ruth, I, of course, completely agree with you, and change will come much faster if it can, have some resources and regulations from the top down that support it, and changes in policy. I do also think that we have enough resources in our region, both in terms of land and capital and people and knowledge, that I don't want to wait. So we have what we need to build at least the small scale version to then build upon when the government comes around.
I love your optimism, and I think you're probably right. There are a few regions in the country, very few, that could do it, and this is one.
Yep.
And we should be working at building a model that everyone can try and replicate.
I also wonder, I'm seeing a trend with some of the farmers that we work with of joining and getting involved with their local government and serving their local government, and then having the ability to develop and implement policy, just a very regionalized and centralized way. But I can see that as, growing, and in the same way that the governors kind of led the climate crisis policy of like infiltrating from these really smart, fabulous folks who are living a new system, how to implement that into their local folks, and then inspiring greater national policy. Yeah. Kate, did you want to add on our
No, I think you've covered all the bases. I mean, and I agree. I think it needs to be top down and ground up. That's the short, very un-English version. But it takes everyone. It takes everyone. But I do think, though, I agree with Henry wholeheartedly. And I also agree with Ruth. I mean, there has to be governmental and systemic change. But I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a combination of both. I mean, just going back to a point that Ruth, I think, made early on, the milk price, why this anathema of how this price is arrived at. And I mean, right now, and it's been the case for some time, fluid milk, producers, the cost of producing the milk is more than they're getting paid for it. So it's really messed up. It's really messed up. Anyway, moving on.
Right. It looks like we're going to go a little bit over time to take a few more questions. And there's some other big questions coming in from the audience here. One is asking about what's been happening to the farms and the regional food system in light of what's happening with our schools. Like, where's the farm to school movement? Is it stalled? Or where are we with that? Anyone want to take a crack at that one?
I don't think it's stalled. I mean, I think people are starting to think bigger about it. Alice Waters is one of the people I speak with regularly. And Alice has this plan of using the entire California university system to grow food for schools. And, you could say she's dreaming big, but, when she started talking about school lunch for kids 25, 30 years ago, everybody thought she was crazy. And now it's a national movement. And, there are all these land grant colleges, which are great places for people to grow food, to learn about growing food. I think that, this crisis is too important to waste. And one of the things I love is how big so many people are thinking. And, one of the things that it's pointed out is that for many children, the lunch that they got in school was the only meal they had a day. And I think that was shocking to a lot of people. And it's clear that whether school opens or not, these children need to be fed.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Kate or Henry, you want to add on to the school conversation?
I don't have too much to add, other than I think kids and how the food system serves them, and how they view agriculture as relates to their future careers or just as a participant in our food system is crucial. But I don't know too much about the current state of farm to school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the same here, I'm afraid. I'm not, I think Ruth has probably got her finger on the pulse a lot more than I do currently.
Yeah, I don't have a business to run. This is my business now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing sort of a theme throughout our conversation is like, it as challenging as it is, and Kate, your personal experience, you're kind of living the challenge. I mean, all of us are, but it's like there's so much opportunity to rethink and rebuild, and kind of, it's so hard to kind of turn those big institutionalized systems, but this is an opportunity to mix it up a lot and be creative about what comes in its wake.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I mean, this whole, as many people have said, this whole situation is a tremendous chance for opportunity, across the board, whether we're talking about a small business or larger on a sort of governmental level, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing is to just not rule out any potential partners in this work, because I think there's so much to be done, and so much that different people from different, involved in different aspects have to offer, that that to me is what's really exciting, because I think we have an opportunity to create a really unified front when it comes to what the future of food can look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, with that note, I think I'll end our time here, but Ruth and Kate and Henry, thanks so much for your expertise and wisdom and graceful articulation of this time right now. And thanks to the Crandall Theater for hosting this conversation. I'll leave you with just a little story. I'm actually not in the Hudson Valley. I'm on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and went to our local farmers market on Monday here. And, I've been to a lot of farmers markets, and even now, and, still the joy and wonderfulness of people coming and with their masks and getting that fresh, beautiful, healthy food. And there were school kids there selling whatever they were growing in their school gardens that have been kicking all summer. And, that's the kind of reality that right now is still resilient enough to keep existing, and that all of you in your work are fostering. So thank you for everything that you do, and keep on keeping on. And thanks for sharing your thoughts today.
Thanks, Kathleen.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Nice speaking with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Take care.